All right, what's up? Welcome in GC Live Monday episode of the show. Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark. Plenty to get to here today as we dive into preseason camp scrimmage number one. There was obviously an open practice, at least part of an open practice on Friday and Sunday. So we're going to dive into those things. That will be the primary focus here on today's show. But first, let us tell you about our good friend Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans, ClintHammond.com. 803-422-6797 is that phone number. NMLS number 71597. As we always tell you, if you're in the market to buy a home and you need a mortgage, Clint is your guy. Or maybe you've been renting, maybe you're going to be a first-time home buyer potentially, and you just want to know what that looks like, what the process is like. Clint, tons of experience, like we always tell you, huge Gamecock fan as well, but definitely somebody who's going to take care of any and all of your mortgage needs. Again, welcome in GC Live. We're going to try to get on a little bit more of a consistent schedule as we get into the season. Gamecock football, 19 days away, believe it or not. So we are just a couple of weeks away from a bona fide game week here in Columbia with Old Dominion coming into town. One scrimmage out of the way, Chris. Another one on deck for this coming Saturday. And then they really start to turn the focus to that game one. We did not get to watch the scrimmage, of course. We did get, I would say, a pretty, at least fairly detailed breakdown, kind of a reaction from Shane Beamer on Saturday. And then you were out there on Sunday able to watch what was going on for practice for a little bit there. What, I guess, from this weekend is maybe your biggest takeaway that we've continued to learn about this football team?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. I think, look, a few things, didn't get to see the scrimmage, but I thought sometimes you have a closed event like a scrimmage and you're still trying to, did we really learn anything? I do agree with you. I think Beamer gave some detail about the scrimmage that, number one, some of those things kind of carried over into what we saw on Sunday. We did get to see 6 periods of practice. It was first of all, it was the final one that we'll get to see. And it was the most extensive. And it wasn't 6 periods of, Hunter Rogers is a good snapper. No offense, Hunter. Don't want to watch you snap for 6 periods, right? Don't want to watch guys catch punts off a jugs machine for 6 periods. We got to see a few cool things that we'll go into, I'm sure. But I thought Beamer gave some details. For instance, hey, we had some self-inflicted things. I know you and I heard similar, right? Few penalties, some big plays that they left out there. But if you're going to, you did ask me to try to boil it down to one thing. I would say defensively, there's some buzz defensively, right? That this team, there's some confidence brewing in the defense that they can turn things around and have a better season, number one, than in 2023, but kind of just take the momentum that they had last November, Wes, and build on that, right? With the guys that they brought back, some of the pieces that they've added. We did hear after the scrimmage, hey, the defense is still ahead. That's not some shock, right? That's not a big shot. Probably pretty typical. Doesn't mean curtains for the offense by any means. But I think, Mike Yuva had some good stuff in one of his reports over the weekend about the defense as well and what he heard about the scrimmage. I think we've just continued to hear that they feel like they've got more depth, particularly in the front 6 or 7 this year. And they really feel good about a lot of those guys. And, of course, there's still some position battles brewing defensively as well. I know we'll get into that. I don't know if I answered the question. There's so many different storylines about this team. But, my main big picture takeaway about this team that's not maybe a position battle or something is really that. Just this defense and how there's an expectation to get not just better, but maybe a good bit better this season.
Yeah, and those guys are obviously, I think it's safe to say, still ahead of the offense right now. Like, I know you just said it, but that's kind of been a consistent thing. I think we've all kind of heard from various people. And I think the fascinating thing is going to be how can this offense kind of gel together in these next 3 weeks and put themselves in a position to succeed going into game one. And, I think you look through the guys on that defense, lots of veterans, right? Like even some of the newcomers are still veterans. Like, are there going to be some young guys that could push into the mix on defense? Yes. For the most part, Chris, I feel like if you're a young guy pushing in and finding playing time on that defense, for the most part, it's kind of just because you're that good. It's not really that you had to play. Like, we've been very high on J.R. Johnson. That's extended into the preseason camp phase of things. But if he's out there, it's because he just went out there and took reps from somebody else. Now, there's a little sense, I think you look at a Jalewis Solomon. Is there a need for a guy, who can play kind of that nickel spot and help provide some depth there? Yeah, I would say that's a little more combination of need plus talent. If Solomon is able to do some things this year, which I think if you're Carolina, you hope that he can provide you some, the luxury of being productive there from a freshman. But for the most part, man, you go over to that offensive side and you're kind of sitting there going, all right, there are some needs here. There's some spots where guys need to step up and play. And not that this is surprising, but from what I've heard, this scrimmage, it was really no shock that the defense kind of controlled the day when you consider, and this is something we talked about going into it, but from what I've heard, Chris, the offense was completely left to their own devices, so to speak. Like, hey, we're not treating this like a practice. Let's treat this like a game. Let's treat this like a game install where you guys are going to have to go out and execute. And let's let you make some mistakes and let's clean it up. And, I think certainly some of the things you hear, are there kind of pre-snap penalties, or their drops, or, some of the little things like that, or their procedural penalties. How much of that can be cleaned up when you're a little bit more just comfortable? Like sometimes mistakes are made because you're still looking for that comfort level. Maybe you're pressing just a little bit. Maybe you're thinking too much as opposed to getting settled in. I think I'm not pressing any panic buttons yet. I think the real question for me as we move this thing forward is, what is this offense going to be? And I think that's kind of the most fascinating. I don't want to say we don't have other questions. We still do. We have other position battles that will be ongoing. I feel like some of these position battles are getting some movement in terms of, like, it's not just the same spot it was in when we were talking about this a week before camp. Like, I think we can start to maybe even put percentages on it. Like, hey, this guy is probably the favorite. To me, you have an NFL offensive coordinator. This was an NFL-style offense last year with Spencer Rattler and Xavier Legette and all those guys. Now it's going to be a very different personnel group this year with Lenore Sellers, with Rocket Sanders, with some receivers that are going to be kind of broken in. How do they manage building this offense around these particular players and their skill sets? And simultaneously, Chris, how do they make it digestible at first without putting too much on all these newcomers and letting them just go play and go play fast? That's something, like, I feel like we're going to go into this opener in 19 days and have maybe as little of a feel for what this offense actually is as we have had in a long time.
That's a good way to put it. And I think when a lot of people, when they hear that, Wes, they might say, "Oh, that's scary," Yes and no. I mean, because here's what you can fall back on. Like, the talent level that's been added to the team on offense, I think will help this offense. You're adding in Rocket Sanders. You have Lenore Sellers, who is a super talented quarterback, albeit young. So that is part of your question, actually, that needs to be answered, Wes. How good of a job can the staff do of putting Lenore Sellers in really good positions. Not that he can't handle it. He's an extremely sharp guy, but he is a first-year starting quarterback. And so, safe to say, he's not going to have every single bit of knowledge or every single bit of a potential playbook that he would have when he's a junior or senior, right? I mean, that's just a fact. That's just the way it is. One of your potential starting receivers is a true freshman, Mazio Bennett. He looks in line to play a ton, if not start. If we're sitting here betting on it today, I'm putting him in the starting lineup, actually. Vandrevius Jacobs is a young player who's also a transfer. Rocket Sanders, experienced football player, but a transfer. You got a couple transfer offensive linemen who may start, albeit very experienced guys. So there are a lot of people who are pretty new to this scheme. And so how easy can you make it on in the beginning? Again, these guys can handle it. Even the guys that are new to this scheme, most of them have played a good bit of football in college, so they can handle it. But now the staff is getting more and more of a feel now that the entire team's here. So you got your guys. These are the guys you're playing with on August 31st. You're healthy, so nobody can say, well, we couldn't get a look at so-and-so. You know what you've got. And as camp progresses, you got one scrimmage down. You got another one coming up Saturday. After the next scrimmage, you're pretty much going to have your cut lines, right? You're going to know, here are the guys we're going to be going to war with. Now let's figure out how to structure this thing. Are they probably going to run the ball more? Yeah, probably. But what does that look like? What's the best personnel packages for these teams? Lots of questions to get answered. And I agree with you. I don't think we can sit here and answer them right now.
How much are they going to be willing to design run a Lenore Sellers as well? I think you look at that and people will maybe roll their eyes at that question, but every coach in America that has a quarterback that can run the football has to make that determination. How much are we going to be willing to run our quarterback when it's designed? So I think it's going to, now to me, that's exciting too, just as a fan of the game, to kind of go into a game and it's week one and you learn, because, Chris, on Gamecock Central, hopefully everybody's a reader. I do those details you may have missed on Monday after every game. And by the end of the season, the details you may have missed are like, we're down to, I don't know, I'm making stuff up almost. The details you may have missed the first few weeks, like you're like, oh, that's a fun wrinkle. Oh, that's cool. That's new. Oh, look at what they did in this situation. Oh, that's a good way to use that guy. I didn't think of that. And so I love that just influx of information you get week one, week two, week three. And the interesting thing, too, after this scrimmage, like you said, you figure out the next sort of 2 weeks, I feel like is like, all right, these are our guys. Let's do everything in our power to get them ready for game one. But then you hope they all perform the way you want. But how often, Chris, do we also see, hey, we saw it, frankly, at the nickelback position last year. Hey, this guy, we're getting him ready. He's going to be our nickel. He won the job. And then it might be 1 weekend and you're going back to the drawing board. We got to figure out something else here. So you're constantly making those decisions and trying to not sort of make a just huge change right off the bat, because then did you just waste those 2.5 weeks getting that guy ready to start when it could have been somebody else in there? So there are 1,000 decisions that are being made. I think it's one of the more fascinating times of the year, though, especially when you get all that new information in week one. Excuse me, y'all. And then I think right now, as we get into scrimmages, we're starting to find out, does some of the public information, some of the stuff Beamer says, match up with some of the things we've been hearing behind the scenes? And there's a couple of guys we have to, I think, hit on, Chris, because to me, they are the stories of the camp so far. And Dre Jacobs, definitely one of them. I want to start with a freshman in Michael Smith, who is someone that I think when you come in the summer, as he did, we knew he was a 4-star guy. We knew he was talented. But you just a lot of times cannot predict before a guy gets into college how quickly they will make an impact. Now, I think there were signs we started hearing towards the end of the summer, like, hey, keep an eye on this. This may be something. And then so far, I mean, Michael Smith is close to being the talk of camp in terms of newcomers, just because he was not here for the spring to show what he can do. And it sounds like he is consistently making plays out there, Chris.
He is. And I mean, I saw it the other day, Wes. I mean, Beamer noted on Saturday that he caught a touchdown. We had heard some other things like, hey, man, this guy, I mean, he's listed at 6'6", 255. So somehow he's even bigger than we thought. And this is a guy we've seen. He's apparently grown in height and weight since we saw him. I guess that was last summer at South Carolina's camp, and he was impressive in that setting. You started to pick up some camp buzz. Remember, summer enrollee, didn't go through spring ball. So you kind of go, okay, will this be too much of a learning curve? But athletically, he's been extremely impressive. Then you turn around Sunday, building off of his Saturday scrimmage performance, where Shane Beamer mentioned him by name. You know, he's out there in one-on-ones. Highly, every now and then in practice, Wes, and not to draw a firm parallel to this. Remember we out there watching practice on the proving grounds, and Alshon Jeffrey lines up against Stephon Gilmore, and there's kind of this buzz. I'm not comparing that. All right, don't put that on Michael Smith or Nicky Memori, but Nicky's one of South Carolina's starting DBs. Michael Smith's this big time true freshman, and when they lined up, some of the coaches, like, they're doing the hands on the knees, the clap. Let's go, here we go. Beamer's over there on the megaphone or microphone calling it out. And Michael Smith runs a great route. They're kind of doing red zone one-on-ones and makes a great catch, over Nicky Memori. And I hear I think somebody on the strength staff said that's elite, and he has that type of talent. He's a big time guy. You see it with Vandrevius Jacobs, like some of the things that he's done in practice, what you hear about him athletically, he stepped in immediately and really, really, both of those guys established themselves like, all right, this guy's a factor no matter who else is on the roster at that position.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Let's put this in context with the rest of that position too, because that's a spot I think you felt pretty good about the tight end position, and you kind of, at least I framed it up coming in like, hey, you feel good about those other guys. You don't have to have a freshman come in and play. It would just be a matter of, is Michael Smith too good, not to see the field? And it appears that's going to be the case. I mean, Beamer came out and said it on the record. Michael Smith is going to play a lot for us this year at tight end. So what do you think that means? Like, I mean, logistically,
yeah.
How do you see that fit? How do you see him fitting in based on what we know about these other tight ends and sort of fitting it all together, you think?
Oh, you're putting all the hard questions on me today. I don't, here's the good news.
You can throw it back at me.
No, I mean, let's both give a take. I mean, here's the good news. When you got a 6'6", 255 tight end who doesn't have the pressure of like he must be the guy this year. We have got to get him ready, and he's got to have the entire playbook. He's got to be ready to go out there, snap one. He's got to play the whole season. Seen that before. And even with talented guys, that's tough. So you don't have that pressure, which I think is actually good. You can think more in terms of, okay, we've got a Josh Simon who's in his 12th year playing college football. Like, he's played a lot of ball. He caught a lot of passes at Western. He had a strong second half of the season last year. You've got Brady Hunt, who has experience as a transfer. You got some other guys there. So now you can think of it more as if you need to just get him acclimated as a true freshman, we can do that. Let's put him out there in the red zone. Try to get him matched up on a linebacker, right? He's got receiver-like skills. I know Wes, Michael told you he can block too. I believe him. I'm not doubting it. But like when you look at his skill set, that's someone that Dow Loggins is probably should be thinking about. How can we get this guy mixed into some packages? When Beamer says he'll play a lot, that's probably legitimately what they think. Now, how you get there, I'm not as sure, but that's where my mind would go. Can we get this guy in situationally and try to get him into some matchups that are favorable to him?
Well, and what has been like the talk all offseason, dude, is, hey, there's not a ton of size at wide receiver. And so to me, I mean, this guy could be your answer. And I'm not saying to just like change him into a wide receiver, but just more so put him on the field and flex him out and do some different things that can get him involved, hopefully in some mismatches in terms of one-on-one matchups. And he's got the size. So I know for the longest time in the narrative, or the thing people say is like, whenever there's anybody who remotely has height, it's, oh, they're going to be a red zone threat. And it's not that easy. Like, it's just not that simple. Just throw it up. However, we had Chris, we saw him in 7-on-7 in the championship game at South Carolina with one play left. And I think the play call was just throw it up for Michael Smith. And he went up and made the grab with current Murray State head coach Jody Wright, his recruiter, and would have been position coach, sitting there, going nuts watching. So I think there's something to be said for when you have a guy that has that size, is an effortless mover, which I think is worth pointing out for somebody that's that big, and can go catch the football. Especially like if we were sitting here talking about Sidney Rice and Alshon Jeffrey being in this receiving core, maybe you're not having quite this conversation. But based on what we know about the receiving core right now, is there an opportunity for him to come out and kind of win some mismatch battles? I think there certainly is. It just, to me, that goes back to, if I'm Dow Loggins, if I'm this offensive staff, how can I best put all these pieces together to where these guys can succeed? And, it's not necessary. Like, I feel like you have to put enough on Michael Smith's plate too, that it can't just be like, hey, put him out there on 3rd and long. We need a big reception, and they're going to get the ball to him. You know what I'm saying? Like, you've got to find some continuity. You've got to get him on the field a little bit more than that. So all of a sudden, though, that position group becomes very interesting, especially when tied in to, hey, are you just going to run more 2 tight end sets as opposed to 3 wide receiver sets, until receiver kind of comes along as an overall position. Stephen Goodman's asked a good question. If Mazio starts at wide receiver, who else is starting in the top 3? And he also goes on to say, who's the next 3, which is an equally difficult question to answer, Stephen. I think I have my 3 right now.
Okay, everybody stop. Get your notepads out.
Well, no, and I will firmly say, obviously, this is not set in stone, and this is educated guess at this point. But I do think at this point Mazio is on track to start. Like, I think he's your starting slot receiver. I think Dre Jacobs has gone from could be a surprise to, if healthy, this dude may be starting. So I'm putting him what are we at, August 12th? I'm putting him on my August 12th starting lineup at wide receiver. And then I'd actually maybe go Jared Brown for that other spot. Now, I could see the starting lineup being 2 tight ends, 2 wide receivers, honestly. But if I'm going off of what has now, I wouldn't call it traditional, but it's now become the standard. I feel like the standard personnel these days for a lot of teams, if you run any spread, if you're a shotgun, it's 3 receivers, a tight end, and a running back. And so that's what I think of when I think of starting lineup. And for that, again, I mean, what do you think, man? Mazio, Dre Jacobs, and Jared Brown. Does that sound right?
Yeah, if you're trotting three out there, that might be it. Here's another thing that kind of relates to what you were just talking about with Michael Smith. You know, I went back and looked. You know, Josh Simon, with what he played last year, he actually played, 451 snaps. About 60 of those were special teams. So let's call it 375 snaps, 400 offensive snaps. Most of the time he played as an inline tight end. There are a handful of snaps where he's like a H-back type, but he played 87 snaps in the slot, played 17 snaps out wide. So the point is, they have it in the playbook where they've got their tight ends moved around some. So Shane Beamer on Saturday mentioned, hey, it is what it is in terms of our size at receiver. But he very quickly turned the attention to the tight end room. He almost talked about the tight end room more than receivers, just kind of went on a tangent with it. And I don't think that was any, negativity towards the receiving room. He just had size on his mind when it came to the receivers and the tight ends. So started saying, hey, we got Brady Hunt and Josh Simon. We got Michael Smith, who had a touchdown today, et cetera. And so that's a guy you can move around. We may see, I hesitate to start talking about personnel packages and take people back to the 2022 Florida game or something. But everybody does have personnel packages. And so there might be some mixing and matching when it comes to getting a Michael Smith on the field. Or if you're thinking about quote unquote three receivers, one of those might be a tight end for you who's in the slot or out wide. It doesn't have to just be rigidly, hey, here are these three receivers and the one tight end on the field, or two receivers, two tight ends. They have some body types and some skill sets that might, let you mix things up a little bit there.
Yeah, and then I'm with you. So Martin says basically get your best guys out there, even if you have to sacrifice height. And I'm with you, man. I only bring the height thing up too because it's just it's a fact at this point, and it's been such a discussion piece. Me personally, I'm not that caught up in it. Like, would you love to have? I think you'd love to have one of those guys be a little bit taller, a little bit bigger. I think that's where can a Delvon Campbell, can a Nick Harbor emerge for you? I think it's still a question. I think that's ideal, but there's no ideal roster. Even the best teams have a couple of things that maybe they wish were a little bit different. So, to me, a lot of the NFL rosters are loaded with wide receivers who are playing and are productive that aren't the biggest guys in the world, but you do still see those sort of what I still call like an X receiver that's your guy that can use his body, use his size to go kind of box out defenders and sort of get open a little bit different than maybe your quicker, smaller guys do. So we'll see if how it ends up playing out. And we're already getting questions. Why is Tyshawn Russell not starting? Again, this is not a starting lineup from the coaches. This is just us talking through it. Is Russell in the mix? Of course. Is Nick Harbor in the mix? Delvon, Gage, all those guys. Luke. However, I think I'm just going off the guys I've heard the most buzz about. If you would have told me in the spring, I probably would have said Gage Larvin as one of those starting spots. I just feel like I really feel like Mazio and Jacobs are starting. And I feel like the other question is who's going to be that third guy. And I think for all these guys, Chris, consistency. Can you consistently catch the football? Like, I think there's talent in that room. Like, these guys can get open at times. Can they go consistently make plays for you? I think is going to be the biggest question and the thing that gets you on the field. Like, if we're saying, hey, why is that guy starting instead of that dude? It almost 100% is going to be because that guy, the guy that's starting, more consistently caught the football in practice.
Yeah, something came to mind earlier too, Wes. These things, we're talking about how they're not in stone. they're not necessarily in stone from game 1 to game 12, game 1 to game 6, game 1 to game 2. Remember that year, 2016, I think it was. Remember Jamari Smith in the slot was the talk. He had a really good preseason. I mean, we saw him at practice. That was when we, I think we still got to maybe see a little bit more practice then. But I recall seeing, hey, Jamari Smith, recruited as a running back out of high school. He's doing some really good things. But started against Vanderbilt in game 1, didn't have a great game. And after that point, you didn't hear as much for him, unfortunately, anymore. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen this year, but we just got to keep it. Why is so-and-so not starting game 1? Like, they will trot out some starters out there game 1, and we'll figure out who they are, and we'll write about them, and we'll analyze it. And the question will be, particularly if there's any sort of struggles, why aren't they playing guy X, guy Y, guy Z? Probably going to be several of them that people talk about this year. Why is that guy not playing? And so the point is, there might be other opportunities. Some of these position battles may continue going on. Remember nickel last year? You referenced that earlier. Keenan Nelson Jr. starts against North Carolina. Before the year is out, you have Nicky and Jalen Kilgore and DQ Smith all taking turns there. Now, the common thread of all those things, the nickel example and the Jamari Smith example is, those were kind of not as good situations because there were some struggles there. That's what you want to avoid. The good news is this year, if you have a receiver in game 3 who starts for you, who has kind of a rougher game, maybe you've got some more options this year. Last year, honestly, you kind of had to roll with it a little bit more because you didn't have as much established competitive depth there. This year, at a minimum, I think you got a little bit more of that.
Yeah, and I think if you earn that start, you kind of earn the first rights of refusal. Like if you go out there and you play well and do what they expect you to do, chances are you can hold on to that. But if you do have struggles, that's where next guy rolls in, and then we find out, hey, maybe there's a gamer in the bunch. Like maybe there's a guy who steps up when there's a little bit of added pressure. Austin with a good point here. Says worth mentioning wide receiver's position. You need multiple guys to be successful. It's just that South Carolina hasn't had that in a while. And I think that's what they're going to have this year because as we talked about, there maybe is not necessarily a Xavier Luedecke who can just take over a particular game as your main receiver. That said, I think we always have to have the caveat. This time last year, Xavier Luedecke was not Xavier Luedecke. So like we were not talking about him being a first-round pick. Did we know who he was? Of course. Was there some excitement in the building about him? There was. But to go do what he did, no, let's not rewrite history. To be fair, like he stepped up and went out and did it, but that was not the expectation at that time. All right, we've talked a ton about wide receivers. I do want to get to a couple of other things before we move on. Let me tell you about one of our other good friends, Andy Luedecke from myperfectfranchise.net. Contact Andy today by either emailing him, andy@myperfectfranchise.net, or giving him a phone call or text 404-973-9901. You may be asking, what does My Perfect Franchise and Andy, what do they do? What they do is they can help you diversify, build wealth, and or leave a legacy and give you that opportunity to start a side hustle or maybe even leave your current job for the American dream. Andy is a franchise consultant, which means he helps people find franchises that will fit their skill sets, financial requirements, time to commit, and more. Even better, his services are 100% free. He is here to help you if you have any questions about business ownership because he himself is a business owner as well. That phone number again, call it, text it, 404-973-9901. Huge shout out to Andy for being a sponsor of GC Live and of multiple other shows on the On3 network. Chris, a couple of other things that kind of popped out in terms of you watching on Sunday or Beamer talking on Saturday. Updates on other position battles. It sort of feels like, so I think it feels like one, Judge Collier does have the fast track on at least starting at that corner spot opposite OD. But then Beamer coming out and saying just flat out, hey, all the guys in the running for that starting spot opposite OD, That would be Judge. That would be Vakari Swain. That would be Emory Floyd. All three of those guys will play game one against Old Dominion, which means, I think typically, Chris, that means two things. That means it's a little bit of an ongoing battle. All those guys have done enough to still be in it. And two, that I think you maybe feel like you have the depth to rotate guys in, but you want to go ahead and get them all out there, let them get that experience in week one, and see how they react to playing in a game situation versus just in practice.
Yeah, that's the key. Exactly what you mentioned there. And kind of goes off what we were just talking about too, the in-game reps, right? I mean, you can have guys that have great springs, great preseasons, and then they carry that into the year and they follow through and kind of it's a continuation. Other times it doesn't for whatever reason. And so it's a way, you do open with Old Dominion, and no disrespect to them, but that's an opener that, you should be able to win. The hope is you can win it comfortably. And the hope is that you can get some playing experience, some very valuable experience for some of these other guys. Those guys have not played a whole heck of a lot of football here at South Carolina. Even Judge Collier, who was the one as a freshman last year who played the most, is still not what you would call an experienced player. So throw them out there, see how they react. I think, Wes, if you're picking a guy, not just there, but I think on the roster overall, that may have the biggest opportunity for upward mobility, that is his role at the end of the year has grown significantly from what it was in game one. Vakari Swain might come to mind for me because he is just athletically, he's got so much, I won't even say potential. I mean, athletically, he's already there, but that gives him as a football player a whole heck of a lot of potential. So be interested to see if does he win the punt return job or at least get an opportunity there? He's still in the mix there, but so are a bunch of others. But at corner, I'm super intrigued by him because of his skill set.
Yeah, I was playing with the idea last week of a freaks list for South Carolina because obviously Bruce Feldman, he comes out with his national freaks list every year. He had both Nicks on it, Nick Harbor and Nick Emanwari, and we were kind of toying with the idea of who else would be on a South Carolina freaks list if you did a top 10 or a top 5. And, there are some obvious ones. I think Lenoris probably on there, Dylan Stewart probably on there. But, Chris, I think you could make a case for Vakari Swain. Like, by my eyes, like he is that just what I call sudden. Like he's just got that much suddenness to his movement that, you really, I think if you're South Carolina, like you're hoping this guy can keep coming along and be a big contributor for you at corner because the upside as a corner is, I think, that immense. And we even, we thought he'd make an impact last year, and that just did not come to pass. But we even heard some things, Chris, after the fact that maybe the staff was like, maybe we could have given him a few more opportunities on the field last year. So I think that's a guy keeping that in mind. Maybe as the year goes on, we see him play a little bit more. And I think, obviously, there are some fans that would love that. But I think that kind of raises the ceiling of what this defense could be because I think he could be the next great cornerback here. Like, I think athletically he is that good. Cornerback battle, or excuse me, I'm thinking about corners. Kicker battle is where I want to go to next, Chris.
No.
Not the most encouraging response from Beamer on Saturday when he was asked about the kickers.
Yeah, inconsistent is the word he used. And, not where you want to be at that spot, particularly if you're looking at this schedule saying, man, are there going to be some games that can maybe come down to a kick? I mean, there always could be. There's been plenty for South Carolina in the past that have come down to a kick. They've been on the receiving end of that with some guys missing some kicks that have helped them win or making some big kicks themselves to win. I mean, Parker White, Elliott Fry, Mitch Jeter, right? And those three guys I mentioned, that's the number one word you would use with them. Remarkably consistent. I did this earlier, Wes. A few just kind of statistical notes. Did this on the 107.5 earlier on the radio show. Like if you look back at Parker White, 2021, I think he only missed, what did I say, 2 field goals? I don't have it in front of me. He missed a couple, 50-yard field goals. No. He missed one. That was it, actually. He missed one shorter field goal from 30 to 39. Kind of a random miss, just one of those things, just kind of mishit it. Other than that, he was perfect. You look at the next year, Mitch Jeter, really good. Didn't miss a single kick. Last year, Mitch Jeter, I think he only missed a couple 50-plus yarders, got him and White mixed up. So just remarkably consistent to where over the past, not just few years, several years, if a South Carolina kicker trots out there, it's been, you feel really good about this, or in some years, it's been basically automatic. And so at a minimum, you're looking at it going, well, that might not be the case this time around. Now, the interesting thing is Alex Herrera, who is in the mix for this job, was the one that was battling Mitch Jeter in 2022. The job that Jeter ultimately got, I think, Wes, safe to say, I don't know if Pete Limbo or Shane Beamer would have said, yeah, I think Mitch is going to make every single kick this year. Like, I don't think they would have said that. I remember Limbo said, hey, Parker White in practice normally hit about 90% of the kicks we gave him. In the offseason leading up to 2022, he said that Herrera and Jeter were at 80, 85. He said, we want that to go up a little bit. Now, Mitch said, sure, I can do that. I'll hit 100% of them in games. The point is, Herrera, like, he's got the ability to be kind of neck and neck with a guy like Jeter. So what is it? Can he become more consistent? We'll see, but it's an important battle for sure.
Yeah, especially, man, when you talk about playing games within the margins where you're going to have tight football games. RCS posed it in the comments as, should we be worried about our kicker? I mean, I don't know if you should be worried, but at the same time, I don't know if you should not be worried. Like, I think that's kind of one of those things, in sports and in general in sports, you don't ever just know until you see it in a game. But kicker especially, man, like I was talking on the radio today. Parker White's first year as the kicker, he did not win the job and then quickly took over. So, and it was because the kicker who won the job initially, did not have a great start to the year. And then Parker got his chance and he just took it and ran with it. So I think it's just hard to predict a position like that is so, I would say, mentally taxing when it comes to the pressure of going out there and performing, when it's very hard to sort of simulate what that pressure is without being in the situation itself in a game. And you can go from being the absolute hero and, big man on campus as a kicker to, I mean, let's be honest, in today's world, literally kickers getting death threats on social media. So I think, that's a pretty big burden to bear if you're a kicker. So I think definitely something we should all be keeping an eye on if you're trying to predict what this season looks like for South Carolina. All right, final thing here, Chris. Let's talk a little recruiting. Between our last show and now, Keenan Britt, 4-star 2026 linebacker, commits to South Carolina over the weekend. Listed as an edge guy, but is I've confirmed 100% as a linebacker for South Carolina, and someone that they go into Alabama and beat out a bunch of SECs for, and really someone that you look at how his recruitment played out, kind of played out quickly from a South Carolina perspective. They offered right after Darren Usher was officially hired. They got him on campus at the end of July, right before that dead period came into place again. And they get the commitment over the weekend. And someone that they, like I said, defeated several SEC schools for.
Well, this is an example, Wes, of, something we heard about Darren Usher is that, hey, this guy is probably going to be able to bring some juice in terms of building relationships with prospects and being able to play a hand in landing them. Different player personnel departments run different ways. Sometimes the guy at the top of the organization is exactly that, a little bit more of an organizer. Sometimes it's a hybrid. Usher, I think, is one of those hybrid types where, yes, he's going to be over the entire recruiting operation and organization, but he's certainly going to try to build relationships with guys. And I mean, there's some examples of some prospects he was highly involved with at Oregon, like DeCorian Moore, the wide receiver that they landed out of Texas and beat Texas and Texas A&M and a bunch of schools for. Keenan Britt's a great example of that. And I think Wes is one of the reasons, maybe the primary reason why this did move so fast. Had an announcement date scheduled, has a South Carolina visit booked, ends up having to move the visit, but follows through with it, takes the visit, and then you feel really good about South Carolina's position right after that. So another quality 2026 prospect that, like you said, they were able to beat out a bunch of SEC programs and other programs to get in this class.
Yeah, no doubt. A guy who I think will play will linebacker for South Carolina. Certainly you're talking about a projection with that, but has some pass rush ability to him as well. You can see, and I think part of the reason he doesn't have quite, Matt asked, would his rating be higher or lower if he moved to linebacker on sites? I mean, you're projecting him to linebacker. Frankly, that's probably why some schools would be a little bit hesitant on him. That's honestly maybe why he doesn't have an even higher ranking, is because you just have not seen that. You watch his film, most of the plays he is playing like defensive end. He's playing edge. Now you can see him chase down plays. You can see he's a very active defender, even from that spot. So you can see the flashes. You can see glimpses of him having to do things that you have to do to play linebacker, particularly in the box in the SEC. It's just a matter of not being able to see the full picture on tape. And but certainly is more the size and the frame of what you're looking for a linebacker at the SEC level as opposed to an edge guy. Also worth mentioning, so he's the brother of KJ Britt, who obviously was a linebacker at Auburn. Darren Usher was there. That was part of what got him on Usher's radar way back then. KJ Britt apparently was telling everybody who would listen about his little brother coming up as a guy to watch. Then Usher's at Oregon, who was also a finalist for him. And Oregon scouted him in person at a satellite camp, and Oregon scouted him at Oregon, I believe, at a camp. So you do have some areas there where you've checked the boxes from a scouting standpoint, even though it's a little bit different. It wasn't at South Carolina's camp, but the guy who was there in the recruiting department at the time, Usher, is now at South Carolina and was able to bring not just the relationship, but the knowledge, the evaluation there as well. So a little bit interesting of a recruitment, but one that South Carolina certainly is very happy to have there. Now back up to 3 commitments for that class of 2026 are the Gamecocks. Beckham says, we haven't seen it. The SEC intro for ABC is trash. Have you seen it yet, Chris? I know it just came out.
No, I was just searching it.
I'm scared to watch it.
Yeah, I am too. I don't know. You know what? I was going to say I'm looking it up to watch it after the show. I've seen some other comments aside from just Beckham's. I trust your judgment, Michael. I don't know. Let's just skip the intro. Just go to the games.
But guys, is this one of those things? We're all nostalgic about the CBS SEC intro, right?
Yes.
Is this one of those things where this was going to suck regardless? Like you have such a no.
No, I think you could still do it right. I think I don't know what right is. I should, you know what? I should watch it because I might say, oh man, that thing's awesome. I doubt it though. I really do.
Has anybody else seen it on here yet on our comments? Also, while we're waiting on y'all to respond, AP poll came out today, right?
Yep.
Let's see. Try to pull that up real quick. I actually have not had a chance to look at it at all. I know On3, I think, posted a graphic. Yeah, they did. Okay, here it is in order. Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Penn State, Michigan, Florida State, your top 10 in the AP poll. Maddox, by the way, says awful, trash. Anyway, any surprises on that top 10 for you, Chris?
Nah, I don't really think so, man. I mean, it's kind of splitting hairs things, you know? It really is. I don't. Do you have big qualms, gripes?
No, but I like Ohio State this year, man.
Do you?
Oh yeah.
Okay. I mean,
You don't think so, dude? That's a loaded roster.
They should be really good.
That is a loaded roster, and they have Chip Kelly running their offense now too.
They should be darn good. There's no doubt. Maybe Notre Dame at 7, just because it's fun to say Notre Dame's overrated. I don't know.
I mean, I feel like there are some clear lines here. Like, would you draw? Is Georgia in a land of their own?
Nah.
Or so I think my first line. I have Georgia and Ohio State as like the two favorites, but then you look at what Oregon added. I maybe draw my line between Oregon and Texas.
You think Oregon's that far ahead of Texas?
I don't know if they're that far ahead, but I'm do I draw my line in between Ohio State and Oregon or Oregon and Texas? I'm not sure. I could make a case either way.
I got a line, and there could be, there's probably another line here somewhere. I look at 6 and 7. I think 1 through 6, where you end with Ole Miss at 6, that's probably your top 6, pretty firm. Like that's kind of how I see it. But then Ole Miss is not, to me, right now. They're not, Georgia or Ohio State. Now they could be. I mean, Jim Nagy, Wes, from Reese's Senior Bowl, said Ole Miss has the most guys with draftable grades in college football. And you don't look at that and go, oh, well, Lane Kiffin, he probably can't get that much out of him. Like, he's pretty good too. So, just saying, maybe yeah. And I don't buy the oh, well, Saban's gone, so Bama's slipping. Like, they still have lots of good players, and their head coach has lost 12 games out of 150 games in his career. So,
yeah, but dude, that's still quite a bit of respect to be number 5 in the country, and you just lost the best coach of our current era.
It is, no doubt.
It is kind of wide open. Once you get past the first, like I said, wherever you draw that line,
yeah,
it's kind of wide. I mean, Penn State's sitting there at 8, and they don't seem to be able to match up when they face the really good teams, and they got so many questions as far as can their offense. I mean, dude, I would have Michigan ahead of Penn State just out of respect of, and I know they what they lost, but until Penn State can beat a Michigan or Ohio State, I would have Michigan ahead of them. Florida State is interesting as well, sitting there at 10. Now there's going to be a team on here that falls flat in this top 15 that, like, every year I feel like Missouri's sitting there at 11 in the country. Like, that's a lot of respect. I get what they did last year, but how much of that is just carryover from what people saw at the end of last year? LSU, who comes here week 3, they're 13th, and they just hired a great defensive coordinator, but that was a bad defense last year, and they're replacing their Heisman-winning quarterback. So they're not going to be as dynamic at quarterback as they were last year. So I feel like there's I don't know, man. There's a lot of teams with questions in this top 25. I feel like.
Yeah, there is. I mean, I do agree with you. I don't know, man. For some reason I feel like Texas is right up there with Georgia and Ohio State. Maybe Oregon too, but for some reason I might be a Texas is back guy this year. That's just I like Texas.
You're Texas over Oregon? I mean, that's fine
Yeah,
if you are. I'm just asking.
I think I might be.
Hey, Texas is very good on college football 25.
Okay, that seals it. Done.
But so is Oregon, I've heard. I haven't played with Oregon on there, but Oregon, apparently Oregon's the best team in the game for what I've seen. So,
Oh, snap. Okay.
yeah. Anyway, all right, y'all. We're out of time. He's Chris. I'm Wes. Hopefully y'all enjoyed it. We're going to go watch this ABC opener and see for ourselves how bad it is. But we'll see you soon. He's Chris. I'm Wes. Y'all have a good one.